Watching my husband raise his crystal glass to toast my sudden mental collapse while holding a pre-signed legal document that surrendered my £30 million patent was the exact moment I realized my 12-year marriage had been a carefully planned execution. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, was standing beside him in the county clerk's private meeting room, adjusting her silk scarf while calmly explaining to the registrar that I was far too mentally fragile and emotionally unstable to handle my own corporate or financial affairs. Tucked beneath the thick stack of corporate buyout contracts on the polished mahogany table lay a certified medical affidavit declaring me completely incapacitated due to severe psychological burnout and cognitive fatigue, complete with a flawless, forged copy of my own signature. My husband Julian turned toward me with a look of terrifying practiced sadness, his fingers tightening around my wrist with a suffocating, possessive pressure as he whispered that I needed to stop making things difficult, accept my illness, and just let the family take care of everything. His younger brother, Oliver, was already standing in the corner of the room on his mobile phone, speaking in a hushed, triumphant tone as he dictated a global press release that named him as the sole visionary behind the revolutionary ecological water filtration system I had spent 7 exhausting years building from scratch in my late father's workshop. They had spent months preparing this exact moment, orchestrating every single legal detail to strip me of my intellectual property, my career, my financial independence, and my dignity, right before an international European environmental conglomerate finalized the multi-million-pound acquisition scheduled for Friday morning. They assumed that my quiet, patient nature was a sign of fundamental weakness. They believed that my years of placing their family's comfort above my own desires had rendered me completely blind to their greed, and that when pushed into a corner, I would simply nod, surrender, sign the papers, and fade quietly into the shadows while they divided the vast profits of my life's work among themselves. I looked down at the heavy gold fountain pen Julian forced into my trembling hand, feeling the cold weight of the metal against my skin, then looked up directly into the cold, calculating eyes of the man I had slept beside for over a decade. I carefully laid the pen down on the blotter, stepped back from the table and met his gaze with a silence so profound and icy that the triumphant smiles on their faces instantly withered away. They had planned my total destruction down to the finest legal paragraph, but they had forgotten the most fundamental rule of structural design, which is that you should never, under any circumstances, attempt to bury the architect who holds the original blueprints. To truly understand how I ended up standing in that county clerk's office with a forged psychiatric report hidden beneath a corporate buyout contract, you have to understand the slow, imperceptible way water erodes even the strongest stone. It doesn't shatter the rock overnight. It wears it down drop by drop, millimeter by millimeter, until what once seemed unbreakable simply turns to dust. My father had been a quiet, visionary environmental engineer who spent over 40 years studying the natural hydrology of the Surrey countryside. He was not a man driven by grand commercial ambitions or corporate prestige. He was driven by a deep, almost spiritual respect for the earth. He believed that nature always provided the solution to human pollution if one was patient enough to observe how natural marshlands, gravel beds, and specific aquatic root systems filtered toxins from the soil. When he passed away 8 years ago, he didn't leave me a vast fortune or real estate empire. He left me his modest, sunlit research greenhouse, a vast collection of hand-drawn topographical notes, and a fierce, unshakable dedication to honest, sustainable work. I met Julian 2 years after my father died, at a regional landscape architecture conference in central London. He was handsome, remarkably polished, and possessed a charismatic confidence that instantly drew people toward him. He was working as a corporate real estate developer at the time, a man who spoke fluently in the language of investment yields, international contracts, and rapid expansion. When we married 18 months later, it felt like the perfect alignment of complementary talents. I possessed the technical knowledge, the scientific patents, and the creative passion, while Julian offered to manage the legal frameworks, corporate structuring, and client acquisitions, so I could focus entirely on my design and engineering work. We founded Vanguard Ecological Systems together, using my father's greenhouse as our original testing facility. For the first 4 years, our life was defined by shared ambition, long hours, and deep companionship. I spent endless hours in the field and in the laboratory, developing a natural biofiltration matrix that used specific organic gravel layers and native aquatic plant roots to remove heavy industrial toxins from urban runoff without the need for toxic chemical treatment. It was grueling, meticulous work that required years of empirical testing, lab analysis, and field trials. But by the 5th year, our prototype achieved a 99% purification rate, securing a full master patent in my name. As the commercial potential of my patent became undeniable, the subtle dynamics of my marriage began to shift in ways I was too naive to fully understand at the time. Julian's mother, Beatrice, an impeccably groomed woman who carried herself with the sharp, cold entitlement of old Surrey wealth, began taking an active, intrusive interest in our company affairs. She had always viewed my background with quiet condescension, frequently reminding me at family dinners that my father had been merely a hard-working technician, whereas the Fieldings belonged to a long lineage of estate owners, bankers, and financiers. Beatrice began visiting our corporate offices unannounced, dropping subtle, toxic hints to our board members that a woman holding the technical patents created an unnecessary complication for major institutional investors who preferred dealing with established corporate directors. At the same time, Julian's younger brother, Oliver, returned from 3 years in Switzerland, following a series of disastrous speculative real estate ventures that had left him heavily in debt and facing potential litigation. Rather than holding Oliver accountable for his recklessness, Beatrice and Julian rallied around him, quietly absorbing his personal financial losses into Vanguard's corporate overhead. I began noticing strange expense reports appearing in our quarterly ledgers, including massive monthly consultancy fees paid to shell management companies that had no physical address, no registered employees, and no clear business purpose. Every single invoice was approved personally by Julian, bypassing my technical desk under the guise of general administrative expenses. Whenever I brought these documents to Julian in his study, asking for an explanation, his warm, affectionate demeanor would immediately turn patronizing. He would wrap his arms around my shoulders, pat my cheek with a condescending smile, and tell me in a soothing, rehearsed voice that I was worrying about administrative details I didn't understand. He insisted that he was simply protecting his brother while shielding me from unnecessary corporate stress, so I could concentrate on my creative design work. "You're the artistic mind, darling," he would whisper smoothly, pouring himself a glass of whiskey without offering me one. "Let me handle the dirty mechanics of business. You just keep building your beautiful little water systems." The true erosion of my standing within my own company began 18 months ago, when Julian suggested that we restructure Vanguard into a holding corporation to prepare for international licensing deals in Europe. He presented me with hundreds of pages of dense, complex legal documents, assuring me that his legal team had drafted everything specifically to protect my sole ownership of the core technology. I was exhausted at the time, balancing 3 major municipal restoration sites while managing our field technicians, and I trusted my husband implicitly. I signed the corporate reorganization papers without hiring an independent solicitor, believing that Julian was acting in the best interest of our shared future and our family. Shortly after the restructuring was finalized, Julian and Beatrice launched a subtle, systematic campaign to undermine my professional authority in front of our staff, contractors, and key clients. If I raised technical objections during a board meeting regarding unrealistic construction timelines or dangerous material cutbacks, Julian would look at the assembled executives with a heavy, sympathetic sigh. He would gently suggest that I was overworking myself, letting my female emotions cloud my professional judgment, and that I needed rest. Beatrice started making deliberate visits to our design studio, having quiet, toxic conversations with my senior draftsmen, asking them if they had noticed how forgetful, erratic, and overwhelmed I had become since taking on the new regional projects. They were systematically laying the groundwork for my destruction, planting seeds of doubt about my sanity and competence in the minds of everyone around me. They began intercepting my emails, rerouting communication with client representatives through Oliver's office, and ensuring that every major engineering decision required dual signatures from Julian and his brother. While I was focusing on the science of cleaning polluted water, the people I called family were polluting the very air I breathed, slowly isolating me from my own life's work until I felt like a ghost walking through the halls of my own firm. The systematic campaign to erase me reached its turning point 3 months ago, during the final execution phase of our flagship project, a massive multi-million-pound urban wetland restoration in central London, funded by a major European environmental consortium. It was the largest contract Vanguard had ever secured, a project that would serve as the global showcase for my patented biofiltration system. Without warning, Julian quietly removed me from direct management of the London site. When I demanded an explanation in front of our project managers, he sat back in his leather chair with a cool, detached smile and claimed that the consortium's foreign representatives insisted on negotiating exclusively with corporate directors who held financial controlling stakes. He patted my hand in front of the team, treating me like an unreasoning child, and promised that my name would remain at the very top of every technical filing, reassurances that felt hollow the moment he uttered them. Driven by a growing, suffocating sense of unease, I visited the London restoration site unannounced, late one Tuesday evening, long after the construction crews had gone home. The site was shrouded in heavy rain, illuminated only by the distant amber glow of streetlights. I unlocked the security gate using my master key and walked down to the excavated basin where the main filtration beds were being laid. What I found beneath the protective blue tarps made my blood run cold. My original biological design specifications, which strictly required high-grade, naturally structured volcanic gravel layers, specific porosity parameters, and cultivated native plant roots to safely absorb heavy metals and industrial runoff, had been completely discarded. In their place, contractors had installed cheap, synthetic plastic mesh, untreated quarry dust, and toxic low-grade industrial slag. It was a catastrophic, fraudulent substitution. Using these cheap materials would cut construction costs by nearly 70%, putting millions of pounds directly into the pockets of whichever corporate entity managed the supply procurement. But within 18 to 24 months of exposure to natural water flow, The synthetic compounds would degrade under UV exposure and microbial action, leaching toxic microplastics, chemical resins, and concentrated heavy metals directly into the municipal water supply of central London. It was not just corporate greed, it was a ticking ecological disaster. Holding the altered CAD site plans and chemical delivery invoices in my shaking, mud-stained hands, I drove straight back to our estate and confronted Julian in his private study. I threw the muddy documents onto his polished desk, demanding to know who had authorized such a dangerous, illegal breach of contract and environmental law. Julian didn't even flinch. He didn't offer excuses, nor did he pretend it was an administrative error or blame a subcontractor. Instead, his warm, affectionate husband persona evaporated entirely, revealing a cold, calculating stranger I had never truly known. He stood up slowly, looming over me, and informed me with chilling calm that my obsessive, emotional perfectionism was threatening a £30 million acquisition deal with a European corporate giant. "We are selling the company, Elena," he said, his voice laced with absolute ice-cold venom. "The buyers don't care about your precious gravel, your idealistic environmental philosophy, or your father's quaint memory. They care about the master patent, the international branding, and the commercial margins. If you attempt to interfere with this transaction, contact the consortium, or step foot on that site again, the board will immediately remove you on grounds of gross insubordination and severe emotional instability. We have already documented your erratic behavior with senior staff." I stood in his study, staring at the man I had slept beside for 12 years, realizing with absolute clarity that my trust had been weaponized against me from the very beginning. I was not his partner, his equal, or his wife. I was merely the technical engine he had cultivated until the harvest was ready. That night, after Julian fell into a heavy, whiskey-induced sleep, I went down to his study and accessed the central network server. Using an administrative override key my father had taught me to code years ago during my university days, I bypassed Julian's encrypted local drives and began digging into the firm's hidden financial architecture. What I uncovered during those dark, quiet hours went far beyond a simple corporate buyout. Julian had not just altered the filtration medium at the London site to boost short-term profits. He, Beatrice, and Oliver had spent the past 3 years systematically plundering Vanguard from the inside out. Through a complex web of offshore shell companies registered in the Channel Islands under Oliver's name, they had billed Vanguard millions of pounds for phantom legal consultations, fake equipment orders, and non-existent European research grants. They were intentionally driving the operational side of Vanguard into crushing debt, planning to declare the original company bankrupt the moment the £30 million patent sale went through. And the most sinister detail of all lay hidden in the small print of the holding agreement Julian had tricked me into signing 18 months prior. All personal liability for the technical patents, biological compliance certificates, and environmental safety guarantees remained tied directly to my personal name as the founding engineer. When the synthetic filtration system eventually failed and poisoned the London water runoff, the criminal charges for corporate fraud, toxic negligence, and massive public endangerment would fall squarely on my shoulders. Meanwhile, Julian, Beatrice, and Oliver would walk away with £30 million safely deposited in tax-free offshore accounts, leaving me to face federal prison and complete personal ruin. 2 days before the scheduled contract signing, I discovered the final piece of their trap. While checking the registry logs at the intellectual property office through a secure proxy, I found an emergency modification filing submitted by Julian's private solicitors. It sought to substitute my name with Oliver's as the primary inventor of the eco-filtration matrix, backed by a sworn affidavit from Beatrice, claiming that my late father had merely provided physical greenhouse space, while Oliver had developed the mathematical algorithms during his time in Switzerland. They weren't just stealing my money, my career, and my freedom. They were attempting to rewrite history and erase my father's entire life's legacy from existence. Instead of confronting them and giving them a chance to destroy digital logs or flee the country, I reached out to David Vance, a veteran forensic financial investigator who had been a trusted friend of my father for 30 years. We met in a quiet basement booth of an obscure cafe near the High Court in London. For 4 hours, David analyzed the encrypted bank logs, altered CAD files, offshore transfer receipts, and forged registry filings I had compiled onto my local drives. When he finally looked up from his screen, his face was grim, his jaw tight with anger. "This is systematic, premeditated corporate fraud, forgery, money laundering, and grand larceny, Elena," David said quietly, pushing his glasses up his nose. "If you take this to civil court now, their solicitors will tie you up in gagging orders and preliminary injunctions for years, using their offshore funds, while they finalize the sale, transfer the assets, and disappear into non-extradition jurisdictions." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to English Stories Hub. A simple like helps more people discover these stories, and your support inspires us to create new ones. Now, let's continue. David proposed a far more dangerous, decisive strategy. We let them believe their plan is working completely. We let them walk right into the county clerk's office with their forged documents, their medical affidavits, and their fraudulent buyout contract. The moment they sign those papers and submit them to a public official, their crime moves from intent to full legal execution. That is when we strike. For the next 48 hours, I played the role of the broken, defeated wife perfectly. I kept my head down, allowed my voice to tremble when spoken to, skipped meals, and pretended to crumble under their psychological pressure. Julian and Beatrice were so blinded by their own arrogance, their social entitlement, and the looming £30 million payout that they mistook my quietness for total, unconditional submission. They truly believed they had broken my spirit beyond repair, which brought us to that fateful Thursday morning in the county clerk's private meeting room. Julian handed me the heavy gold fountain pen, his fingers crushing my wrist as he whispered his final threat against my freedom. Beatrice stood beside him, her face a mask of aristocratic disdain, waiting for me to surrender my father's legacy with a single stroke of ink. Oliver was already dictating his victory press release to a public relations agent on the phone in the corner. They believed they had backed a desperate, powerless woman into a corner. They didn't realize they had walked into a trap constructed with mathematical precision. I set the gold fountain pen down on the mahogany table with a soft, deliberate click. I met Julian's cold, expectant eyes, withdrew my wrist from his grip, and reached calmly inside my coat pocket. "What are you doing, Elena?" Julian snapped, his voice dropping an octave as his smile vanished instantly. "Sign the document. Stop playing games." "I'm not playing games, Julian," I said, my voice echoing with absolute, unshakable clarity through the quiet room. "I'm executing a structural correction." I pulled a sleek, encrypted silver flash drive from my pocket and laid it directly on top of the buyout contract in front of the astonished county clerk. Before Julian or his mother could react, The heavy mahogany doors of the private office swung wide open. 4 senior federal investigators from the Serious Fraud Office, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and David Vance, walked calmly into the room, holding official search and arrest warrants high in the air. The lead investigator, a tall man with sharp gray eyes and a heavy leather folder under his arm, stepped into the center of the room. He produced his official credentials and laid 2 formal federal warrants on the mahogany table directly beside my silver flash drive. "Serious Fraud Office," he announced, his voice dropping like an iron shutter over the room. "We hold warrants for the immediate seizure of all physical and digital assets, servers, and financial documentation belonging to Vanguard Ecological Systems, Marling Holdings, and its listed directors. Furthermore, we are executing court-ordered freezes on all domestic and offshore accounts linked to Julian Fielding, Beatrice Fielding, and Oliver Fielding." For 3 long seconds, the room was completely silent. The air seemed to leave the space all at once. Beatrice was the first to break the silence. Her face turned a dangerous mottled red as her aristocratic composure disintegrated into raw, ugly panic. She slammed her designer handbag onto the table, stepping toward the officers with her finger raised aggressively. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "This is a private corporate meeting. My family has built this city. I will have your badges, your positions, and your careers by sunset. Call our solicitors immediately, Julian." "Your solicitors are currently being served with identical search warrants at their city offices, Mrs. Fielding," the lead officer replied, without a hint of emotion in his voice. "And I strongly advise you to remain seated. You are officially under federal investigation for grand corporate fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and multi-million-pound tax evasion." Oliver's mobile phone slipped from his trembling hand, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. His face had drained of every drop of color. "Julian," he stammered, his voice high, weak, and panicked as he backed into the corner. "Julian, you said this was completely safe. You said she signed all the waivers 18 months ago. You said the Channel Island accounts were completely invisible to domestic authorities." "Shut your mouth, Oliver," Julian roared, turning on his brother with raw, unfiltered desperation. Then Julian turned back to me. The charismatic, handsome mask he had worn so effortlessly for 12 years was gone, replaced by a terrifying, frantic predator caught in a tight cage. He rushed toward me, grabbing my shoulders before the officers could intervene, his voice dropping into a raspy, pleading whisper. "Elena, please, look at me," he begged, his eyes darting frantically across my face. "This is a nightmare. This is a massive misunderstanding between us. You know I love you. Everything I did, the offshore accounts, the corporate restructuring, it was all to protect our family's future. It was to secure our life together. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them this is a private civil dispute between husband and wife. We can fix this, Elena. Please don't destroy our life over business." I looked down at his hands gripping my coat, then raised my eyes to meet his. For 12 long years I had bent my will to make him happy. I had swallowed his condescension, apologized for his mistakes, put up with his arrogant family, and allowed him to take credit for my intellect, all because I believed love required endless sacrifice and endless patience. I felt no anger toward him in that moment. I felt no urge to yell, cry, or strike him. I felt only a vast, clean, unshakable clarity. "You didn't build a life with me, Julian," I said, my voice steady and completely calm, carrying across the room so clearly that even the officers paused. You built a scaffold, and you spent 12 years waiting for me to step into the noose, but you forgot that I built the trapdoor. I stepped back, slipping easily out of his grip. 2 uniformed officers immediately moved in, grabbing Julian's arms, forcing him back against the table and placing him under physical restraint. Mr. Vance and Mrs. Fielding have provided this office with 12 months of uncorrupted server logs, encrypted bank transfers, altered site blueprints, and forensic CAD evidence, the lead investigator continued, pointing to the silver flash drive on the table, including IP address timestamps proving the medical affidavit declaring Mrs. Fielding incapacitated was generated directly from your personal laptop in your home study, Mr. Fielding, and signed using a digital forge vector stolen from her corporate account. Julian stared at the silver flash drive as if it were a venomous snake. He realized, with absolute crushing finality, that every single trap he had set for me over the past 3 years had been documented, analyzed, mirrored, and turned into a state's evidence file. As the officers began securing the laptops, legal files, corporate stamps, and mobile devices from the mahogany table, Beatrice sank heavily into a leather armchair, her eyes wide and glassy as she stared at the floor. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had spent years treating me like a low-class technician was now watching her family's entire social standing and wealth dissolve into criminal indictments before her eyes. Before they led Julian out of the clerk's office in handcuffs, he turned his head back one last time. His face was twisted with pure, poisonous hatred. "You're nothing without me, Elena," he spat, his voice echoing down the marble corridor as staff members gathered to watch. "You're just a glorified gardener. Vanguard will collapse in a month without my connections. You'll lose everything." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I simply picked up my father's silver fountain pen from the blotter, wiped the small drop of black ink from its nib with my handkerchief, and tucked it safely inside my pocket. The legal storm that swept through the Fielding family over the following 8 months was swift, merciless, and absolute. When presented with the forensic evidence compiled by David Vance and the Serious Fraud Office, Julian's high-priced legal team collapsed within weeks, facing 22 counts of corporate fraud, forgery, money laundering, tax evasion, and environmental endangerment. Julian pleaded guilty to avoid a maximum 20-year sentence. He was sentenced to 7 years in a high-security federal facility, his personal assets seized to pay for legal restitution and contractor penalties. Beatrice Fielding was forced to liquidate her historic Surrey estate, sell her private art collection, and surrender her family trusts to cover the millions of pounds in back taxes, fines, and unpaid corporate debts Julian had hidden in her name. She moved into a small, dark rental apartment on the outskirts of London, completely alienated from the high society circles that had once been her entire world, abandoned by the fair-weather friends who had once courted her favor. Oliver Fielding received a 3-year suspended sentence after agreeing to turn state's evidence and testify against his brother. His professional reputation was permanently destroyed, his real estate licenses revoked, and his name blacklisted across the entire financial and corporate sector. As for Vanguard Ecological Systems, I initiated an immediate total corporate cleansing. I dissolved the fraudulent holding structures Julian had created, fired every corrupt manager who had enabled him, and returned the company to its original, honest mission. I personally oversaw the restoration of the flagship London wetland site. We ripped out the cheap synthetic mesh, untreated quarry dust, and low-grade slag Julian had secretly installed, replacing them with authentic, naturally structured volcanic gravel layers and native aquatic plant matrices cultivated in our own facilities. When the European consortium inspected the completed site 6 months later, the water purification levels reached a record 99.8%, far exceeding international safety requirements. They didn't just proceed with the international licensing deal, they doubled their investment capital, naming Vanguard as their primary ecological design partner for all future European urban restoration projects over the next decade. I sold the grand hollow mansion I had shared with Julian and moved back to the Surrey countryside permanently. I purchased a small sunlit stone cottage right on the edge of the marshlands, just a short walk from my father's original research greenhouse. I restored my father's old workshop completely, installing new solar arrays, expanded laboratory space, and modern testing filtration tanks. Today, his original wooden drafting table sits in the center of the main room, bathed in natural light, holding the hand-drawn blueprints of our master patent alongside our newest international environmental awards. Sometimes, in the quiet late afternoons, when the wind rustles gently through the wild reeds and the water runs crystal clear through the natural filtration beds outside my window, I sit at that drafting table with my father's silver fountain pen in my hand. Julian thought he was destroying me when he handed me that forged contract in the clerk's office. He thought he was forcing me to choose between total surrender and complete ruin. What he and his family never understood is that real strength isn't built on money, titles, legal tricks, or corporate manipulation. Real strength is built like a natural wetland, quiet, patient, deeply rooted, and capable of purifying even the most toxic environment given enough time. I didn't survive their destruction by becoming like them. I survived by standing firm in the truth, honoring my father's memory, and rebuilding my life on a foundation no one will ever be able to steal from me again. Thank you for spending your time with us. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and let us know what you thought. We'd also love to hear what kind of stories you'd like to listen to next. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to English Stories Hub. A new story is coming soon, and we can't wait to share it with you. Thank you for your support, your comments, and for being part of our community. Until next time, take care and keep the stories alive.